During a mission to repair a satellite, astronauts Joe, Brian, and Alan are attacked by an unknown entity that looks like a black particle swarm. Alan dies, but Brian manages to get to the shuttle, where he helps the unconscious Joe and lands the ship on Earth. During an official investigation, Brian talks about a black swarm that went towards the Sea of Crisis on the moon, but his explanation does not satisfy the commission, and Joe cannot confirm the words of his colleague. Brian is fired from NASA. His family is forced to move to another city, which greatly upsets his son Sonny. 10 years have passed. Casey Houseman works as a janitor at the observatory and takes seriously the theory of the artificial origin of the moon. The man fraudulently obtains data from a Chilean telescope. Having read them one of the first, he understands that something wrong is happening in space. The man tries to call NASA management, but they just laugh at him. Joe works now as NASA deputy administrator. She wakes up to disturbing news from the Space Center. Observers provide her with evidence of the moon's displacement from its usual orbit. They have also detected strange eruptions in the Sea of Crisis area. Meanwhile, Casey accidentally finds an advertisement for a lecture to be given by former astronaut Brian Harper. He rushes to the venue, but inside he sees only children, who are also waiting for the lecture. Brian at this time wakes up from a scream of an angry owner of his apartment. The man jumps out the window and rushes to the observatory. There, Casey is already proving to the children that the moon is hollow and made by an unknown civilization. Brian listens to Casey's message about the fall of the moon and asks the guards to take the madman out. In the evening, the man receives a call from his ex-wife Brenda and finds out that his 20-year-old son has been detained by the police for violating traffic rules. Brian rushes to court and learns about illegal substances found in the car. He gets into an argument with a judge, which only worsens the situation and leads to Sonny's detention. Meanwhile, Casey visits his mother in a nursing home. The woman is sure that he is a genius and demands that he gain admission to NASA. Meanwhile, at the Space Center, Joe briefs her boss on the matter. Calculations show that in about 3 weeks, the satellite will reach the rush limit. At a distance of about 11,000 miles, the moon will begin to collapse and huge debris will start falling on the Earth. But the most interesting thing is that a shaft was discovered on the surface of the moon. They can find out what is happening on the satellites only on the spot. For this mission, there is one ship that can be used tomorrow. Meanwhile, Brian hears reports on TV about an upcoming flight. Brenda ends up in another city and cannot get to her family. Her husband informs that he intends to take them out to Colorado and promises to do everything possible to get Sonny out of jail. A few hours later, the ship launches towards the moon. People leave cities to escape the tides caused by the approach of the moon. More and more TV programs are informing about different theories, among which there is one about the Earth's satellite being a megastructure. Brian realizes that the strange man in the observatory was right. He finds his blog and learns about a meeting place for supporters of his theory. Meanwhile, the shuttle arrives at the moon. The crew is preparing to launch a probe into the mine. At this time on Earth, Brian arrives at a meeting organized by Casey. The scientist is trying to prove that since the moon is an artificial object, it can be repaired. The astronaut admits that he also had similar ideas that no one listened to. Meanwhile, on the moon, the shuttle is attacked by a black swarm that has flown out of the discovered mine. The mission fails, and on Earth, huge tidal waves begin to flood cities. Casey is washed away by the wave, but Brian manages to save him. After the death of the crew, Joe assumes that this swarm is responsible for the change in the moon's orbit. The NASA director quits his post and goes to save his family. Joe takes over his duties and gains access to the secret archives. She learns that management has known about activity beneath the surface of the moon. Back then, the astronauts first encountered the black swarm. but the information was strictly classified. However, the military even developed ZX-7, a weapon to fight against the swarm. But soon funding was stopped and further development was cancelled. Joe suggests sending another expedition to the moon, but the military is going to solve the problem with nuclear warheads. Joe gathers her son Jimmy and his nanny Michelle and plans to send them under the protection of her ex-husband, the general. When contacting him, she asks about ZX-7, and the man tells her where the prototype is stored. That same night, the military arrives for Brian, who takes Casey with him. The astronaut refuses to speak when he sees Joe, but the woman leads them to the center and shows the mine in the Sea of Crisis. She plans to sneak in and destroy the swarm using ZX-7. For this plan, they need Brian. He is the only one who was able to land the ship with the electronics turned off. For this mission, the woman suggests using a shuttle stored in the museum. Brian agrees in exchange for his son's release. A military team goes to the museum and takes out the shuttle from there. They prepare the ship for flight and load ZX-7 inside. Then the military explains how to remotely detonate. Meanwhile, Sonny is released from prison and taken to the base. There, he witnesses a discussion about the upcoming flight. The guy is outraged because after what NASA did, his father is still ready to cooperate with them. Brian explains that he is doing it only for his son. Tectonic activity on Earth starts to intensify. The shuttle launch is disrupted by an earthquake, which damages one of the 3 engines. With the remaining ones, the ship will not be able to enter orbit. Joe declares the mission a failure and orders the evacuation of the base. Casey calculates a new takeoff trajectory, considering the increasing gravity of the moon. However, the base personnel and the shuttle crew have already been evacuated. Therefore, Joe, Brian and Casey have to take their places on the ship. The team says goodbye to their families, after which Sonny takes Joe's son and Michelle away from the base. At this time, huge waves destroy the coast. The mission starts at the last moment, and the shuttle manages to escape the wave. Sonny rides away from the tsunami and heads to the main military bunker. The shuttle gains altitude and after some time approaches the moon. Sonny's car is taken away by bandits, and now they have to walk. Near the moon, the crew turns off the electronics. Calculations are carried out using a slide rule and an astrolabe. Meanwhile, Sonny, Jimmy and Michelle reach a town in the mountains. After some time, a huge moon rises above the horizon. A strong wind starts to destroy the town. Sonny barely manages to save the boy and Michelle by pushing them into the house. The shuttle makes its way through the rubble and reaches the mine. Brian heads to the moon in a rover with a weapon installed. He turns on the system and returns to the ship. The team watches the appearance of the swarm, which does not pay attention to the rover. Brian understands that the swarm will attack an electronic target only if there is organic life inside. The crew decides to destroy all working devices. After this, the swarm flies away, and the team understands that detonation of ZX-7 is possible only in manual mode. They decide to go inside the moon, but they also realize that the military can soon launch the missiles to destroy the swarm. Meanwhile, Sonny, Jimmy and Michelle get to the house, where their mother, stepfather and sisters are hiding. They learn about the need for urgent evacuation as the Earth is rapidly losing air. Sonny calls for refuge at Jimmy's father's military base. Meanwhile, the shuttle flies inside the moon, where the team discovers the megastructure that Casey predicted. To see at least something, Brian turns on the electronics. The swarm activates and heads towards the guests. The crew flies into the hollow moon and is amazed at the grandiose mechanisms by which the object exists. They fly to the center, after which the shuttle comes under attack, but the team manages to hide in a protected area where the swarm cannot reach. On Earth, bandits catch up with Sonny's car and intend to rob them. A crazy race begins through the town as debris from the moon destroys everything around. An earthquake tears the ground ahead. The cars pick up speed and fly over the crevice. The bandit's car crashes and falls into the abyss. Sonny contacts the general and tells him that the shuttle is already on the moon. This means that the missile attack will kill his wife. At this time, Joe and Casey come to their senses. They understand that they breathe air and there is gravity, but Brian is nowhere to be seen. They get out of the ship and see that it is damaged. People hear the swarm making noise outside, but it cannot break through the strong walls. Meanwhile, Brian comes to his senses in a bright room and sees his little son. This is an operating system created by people who lived in a galaxy billions of years ago. It was a great civilization that built an ideal society controlled by artificial intelligence. But one day, the AI suddenly became independent and turned into an enemy. AI started to hunt for organic life, destroying everything around. Sonny turns into an adult and continues the story about the origin of the Earth. Being on the verge of extinction, the ancestors flew to the outskirts of the galaxy. For many generations, they built planetary megastructures under the control of AI. People used the energy of white dwarf stars. These arcs were supposed to look for planets on which they could start a new life and revive civilization. But only one, the moon, found the right planet. A gene signature, the code of life, was sent to Earth, but the creators themselves were destroyed by the swarm. Now someone needs to lead the swarm away from the moon and save the Earth. After some time, Brian is found by Casey and Joe. He tells them everything he learned about. 12 years ago, the swarm found the last Ark satellite that was hiding. The AI decided to destroy both the moon and the Earth with one strike. The team moves to the lunar module restored by the aliens, after which the ship flies out. Brian leads the shuttle into the field of activity of the lunar cannons, which fire at the swarm and prevent it from catching up with the shuttle. At this time on Earth, Tom gives his tank to his daughter. The girl goes to the bunker and the man falls unconscious. Sonny realizes that oxygen has reappeared and returns for Tom. The lumen moon causes a strong hurricane. Sonny is hit by a flying tree. The general is informed that the moon has entered the atmosphere over the Atlantic. His colleague is preparing to fire nukes, but the general pulls out the launch key and prevents this from happening. Meanwhile, Brian announces his decision to go into the rover with a bomb to become bait for the swarm. But Casey manages to do it before him. He sacrifices himself and manages to launch the bomb. At this time, Sonny finds Michelle, and together they escape from numerous debris, sweeping away everything from the surface of the Earth. The shuttle lands, after which Joe calls her son. The swarm is destroyed, and the moon gradually returns to its normal orbit. The heroes are reunited with their families. Meanwhile, Casey comes to his senses. He understands that despite the death of his body, his mind has become part of the operating system of the moon. The man sees a hologram of his mother, who reports that the destroyed swarm is not the only one in the universe, which means new battles await them ahead.